Let's start off with Garrett Wilson, wide receiver out of Ohio State. 6 foot, 183 pounds, going to be 22 in 1 month when the season kicks off. Finished the year last year with 70 catches, 1,058 yards, and 12 touchdowns. But he came in right away as a freshman and produced as well. He looked pretty good there. 30 catches, 432 yards, 5 touchdowns. Followed up with 43 catches, 723 yards, and 6 touchdowns. But always looked good. Was the number 1 high school recruit coming out that year. So when he go to Ohio State, he was the number 1 high school receiver coming out. At the combine, he had 4.3840, a 36-inch vertical, 123-inch broad jump, a 4.36 short 20-yard shuttle. This is a guy who played 30% in the slot last year. Ran 73.1% of his routes from the slot in 2020 as well. So he was a slot receiver there amongst all those receivers. Guy who has really good really good hands. Garrett Wilson only has 6 career drops, and he's somebody that when he gets in space, he's electric, right? Like he might, at the time you're like, he might not be the fastest guy, but then he was a super fast guy. But this is somebody who can get up, get the football, who's electric in space. And talking about get up, he can really get up. Once he gets the ball in his hands, that's where he does his damage.
There's a Viagra joke in there that I couldn't suppress.
In your mind.
I couldn't suppress my smiling anymore. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, he has those quick feet. He explodes when he gets the ball in his hands. He has good vision. He stacks his defenders really well. He's somebody that can just plant his foot and go. Continue to show that he has pretty good burst. Just an overall really safe prospect of what he shows on film. I mean, we're looking at cons of Garrett Wilson. The only thing I was really concerned is he's a little thinner, about 183 pounds there. A little trouble sometimes versus the press, but even in today's NFL, you see a little bit less of that. But sometimes at the up close, you're a little physical with them. That's about it. That's the only thing I could really come up with. I'm interested in what you guys can say on this, because when I looked at Garrett Wilson, he's definitely in contention to be the number 1 overall receiver in my rookie rankings. We're going to talk about another guy who I have really close here as well, and I obviously haven't dug super deep into Jameson Williams or Drake London yet. Yeah. And I know you have a surprise guy we're going to talk about later.
I actually have him third. I thought he was second. He's actually third.
But Garrett Wilson is going to be the first wide receiver taken off in many Dynasty rookie drafts this year. A very safe, is as safe as Breece Hall is at running back. Garrett Wilson's safe at receiver. Somebody who can offer wide receiver 1 upside. My gut instinct says, even though as much as I like Garrett Wilson, I could definitely see him hovering around, and this is not a slight, but wide receiver 14 to 17, year in, year out, like a high-end wide receiver 2 when it comes to Dynasty fantasy football, which again, that's not a bad thing. You got to remember there's only 36 wide receiver 1s, 2, 3. And there's only 32 NFL teams. So when you think about it, when you got guys that are wide receiver 1s on the same team, it's like, it's snap. Incredible. You know what I mean? It's pretty incredible. So I like Garrett Wilson a lot. And I have no problem taking him as my first wide receiver. I think there is maybe 1 or 2 more receivers that offer potential more upside than him when it comes to a Dynasty fantasy football player. But when it comes to safety, and sometimes when you're picking that high, you just want to get somebody that are going to give you high-end numbers year in and year out. So when I say wide receiver 14, that's Robert Woods on a year in, year out basis, which is a championship caliber player with the potential to still be that wide receiver 1. Matt, what do you think of Garrett Wilson of Ohio State?
No, I really do like him. I think he has good suddenness. He wins at all levels of the defense. He can get you downfield. He can get you on posts, in cutting routes. Stuff coming back to the quarterback. He can beat you on little screen passes, little drag routes that he can take to the house. So I think he wins in a lot of different ways, which is obviously something you really, really want. And he's a pretty good route runner. I wouldn't say he's exceptional in that area, but combined, the fact that he's a good route runner with his explosion and his speed, and he gets separation. So, to me, that's somebody that has room to grow in that area and actually get better at the NFL, which is something I like. So Garrett Wilson, I do think he's my number 1 guy right now. He's the only guy in my first tier of wide receivers that I've watched so far in depth. So right now he's kind of living alone in that stratosphere as far as my rankings. But I like you said, I've got plenty of tape to go through, and we have all these people that we're going to be going over next week and the week after. Right. So there might be somebody else that lands there. Obviously, Jameson Williams is the guy I think comes to mind for me that has the probably a little bit higher upside, and that could potentially be in that spot as well with him. Right off the bat, but I still have a long way to go for his tape study.
And we have to think about too. I mean, there's certain teams at the top of this draft, like the Jets, that are desperately trying to add a receiver, right? So if Garrett Wilson's one of the first receivers off the board and he goes to the Jets per se, we know the Green Bay Packers and the Kansas City Chiefs pretty much. Now, no, we don't know anything for a fact, but odds are pretty damn high that they're going to take a receiver in the first round. Yeah. Definitely the Chiefs with multiple picks. So all of a sudden you flip it, and a guy like Jameson Williams.
Don't the Packers have multiple picks this year also in the first round?
Yes, because of Devontae Adams.
So
they both have multiple picks. So the fact that Garrett Wilson goes, say, to the Jets, and then all of a sudden we slip down and Jameson Williams goes to the Chiefs and Treylon Burks goes to the Packers, that's going to switch some people's eyes where these players end up. And that's what I'm saying. Like, for me, we're talking about Treylon Burks in the second episode. He'll be the first player we're talking in the nerd episode. And I'm saying right now, him and Garrett Wilson, where Garrett Wilson's super safe, Treylon Burks offers that dynasty fantasy football upside, I think, higher than Garrett Wilson. And those are the things that we'll have to struggle with. And for me, it'll come down to as simple as, wow, Garrett Wilson's on the Jets and Treylon Burks is on the Packers. That's an easy little bit of a nudge that I can see with Aaron Rodgers for 3 years to turn him into that Devontae
We've made
Adams.
these mistakes before, though, Richard.
We have, and I'm going to continue making those mistakes down the road. But these two prospects are like really close. We're not talking about taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire, our clear number 4 running back, and moving to number 1. We all did that.
Right.
We're not going to make that mistake. Garrett,
no, we all did that.
We'll talk about him in the first. When we kick off the next show, Treylon Burks compared to Garrett Wilson. Because I would like to see where we differ on this. Because you said he's a clear cut number 1, and that's where I struggle right now. Garrett Wilson, who I thought would be a clear-cut number 1, after I dug even deeper into Treylon Burks, it's not so clear-cut for me, and I'll explain why in the next episode. What do you think of Garrett Wilson, Garrett?
I
love his first name.
Yes. Great first name. Highly intelligent, clearly. I'm with Matt. He is my clear-cut number 1. And I say clear-cut because there's no chance of anybody, in my mind, passing him before draft capital, but it's not to say that second tier is like way far behind them. Like, it's a very, very solid second tier. I just don't see anybody passing Garrett Wilson at this point for me. I like to see guys that produce early and then continue to progress throughout their career. And that's exactly what he did at Ohio State. Came in, had about 500 yards, 4 touchdowns as a true freshman. And that's tough to do, especially at Ohio State with all the great receivers that have been coming through, all the great high recruits that they get, to be able to produce that early. But then he just got better and better every season. We saw him progress in that sense. And I currently have him, this is my personal score, this isn't the overall nerd score. I personally have him at a 79.4. So in the 3 years that we've been doing the nerd score tape scores of my personal scores, the only 2 receivers so far that have had a higher score for me have been Chase and Devontae Smith. Those are the only 2 that have higher. And the one that's just a hair, like decimal points behind him, is CeeDee Lamb. So he's right there for me in that tier of those elite receivers, some of the best receivers in the draft, guys that you would expect to be top 15 type picks. And so that's what I expect for him. I do think he'll be a top 15 pick. I think one of the things that I really just gravitate towards with Garrett Wilson is he always has a plan. And he's never out of control. It seems like everything, he just lets the game come to him. And so I think that's what I really like. You see him do well, not just against man, but against zone. He understands the differences of what the defenses are going to do. So I just don't see a scenario where he ends up being Jalen Reagor. I just don't see a situation where he ends up being like one of these guys that are like had so much hype and so much potential and just fell flat on his face. I think he's one of the safest receiver prospects that we've had in quite some time.
Which says a lot because, again, at the top of the draft, that's what you're looking for. And I agree with that 100%. Like, this is a safe prospect. Worst case scenario is a wide receiver 2, like low end wide receiver 2, which is still, and that's a home run threat in a rookie pick that you get somebody to start year in, year out for the next 10 years. So that's what Garrett Wilson offers your Dynasty fantasy football. And that's why he probably will be the number one receiver taken just because of that safety net. Now, again, we say that, but with how many of these teams that need receivers, somebody's going to get a little bit antsy out there. Jared, you got any thing you want to chime in on there?
Going forth on these, it's like you guys pretty much hit on everything, so I don't have too much more to add. I'll just say, like, from a quarterback standpoint, he's a quarterback's best friend just due to his fantastic body control that he possesses. Like, you can throw it anywhere and trust that he's going to be able to contort his body and make the catch. His catch radius is huge. So I love that. You can line him up inside. You can line him up outside. He did both at Ohio State. So from a coaching perspective, you love that. You love the flexibility that he's going to give an offense, especially in today's offenses where they're moving guys around constantly. He beats press. He has a really good press beating. He has really good package off the line of scrimmage. He runs great routes, so he's good after the catch. He's my highest graded wide receiver. He's my wide receiver 1 right now. I won't say that he's alone in that top tier. I have Jameson Williams up there as well. Spoiler alert. But no, I think he's extremely safe. And when we say safe, it's not like he doesn't offer a ton of upside either.
Yeah,
I mean,
I did want to mention that.
Yeah, I think he just has like a higher floor than say a Treylon Burks. But I also agree. I think Treylon Burks, his profile athletically and his physical profile just offers you possibly a little more.
Well, one thing that I know you and I talked about that I didn't mention, I was wondering if you were going to mention, the only knock that I personally had, and I know this was something that you shared as well, Garrett Wilson's not as physical as you would like him to be at times.
I agree. That's his lowest graded trait that we had in our nerd score.
Yep.
I'd like to see him fill out a little more and become a little more physical. But, yeah, when people test his physicality or get up in his space, he struggles a little bit. I agree.
It's the only thing I could find that I didn't like come away like, oh, sometimes you got to be like nuanced. I'm like, what don't I like about this guy? Definitely a prospect like Garrett Wilson, who is so good at playing the position. Yep. And that's why I said, and again, when I say, I see him at wide receiver 14, the 16 on a year in, year out basis, it's not a bad thing because you still right now got to compete with guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill.
And that's not to say he couldn't have a wide receiver 5 overall season at some point or something like that.
For sure.
That's just saying that's kind of what we expect his typical range of outcomes to be.
And he, like you mentioned earlier, like he produced at Ohio State he's literally one of the reasons that shoved Jameson Williams out of Ohio State room. Right. I mean, he was in a wide receiver room with Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jameson Williams, Chris Olave. These are guys that were all pretty. Jackson Smith and Jigba will be probably the number 1 receiver off the board next year. Probably a high NFL draft pick. Terry McLaurin, a high second NFL, third round pick, but now shown really well. Paris Campbell, a second round pick at the NFL draft. So he was in a really good room. Ohio State is starting to pump these receivers out, and right now he left a room of Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marvin Harrison Jr. So. And he always produced.
Shout out to Canton, Ohio's finest, Brian Hartline, on training those guys up.
How is he not a head coach somewhere?
He will be soon. They promoted him to something this year. They gave him a bigger title.
Yeah, like you are even better with the receivers as the receiver.
Yeah, he's
coach.
killing it.
But I think he also likes his job.
He does.
Like,
he does a good job with it.
That's what he wants to do.
Yep.
He attracts the best receivers in the country.
He does.
Yeah.
He does.